All right, so we're going to add camouflage to this weapon, and it's a little bit of a lengthy and intricate process, but just try to bear with me. We're going to go through this as fast as possible. Once you understand it, it's not so complicated, but just learning it, I think, is pretty daunting. So keep that in mind. First thing you need is a tileable texture of camouflage. In this case, I found this image online. I can just go ahead and copy it and change the canvas size. So that's a square. We're going to do 1024 by 1024. That's the size of the texture for the AUG. And I'm going to paste in the original so I can select whatever part that I find that I like the most when it comes to the colors and everything. I'm going to press Control A, do a filter, other, offset, and I'm going to offset it by 512 by 512. And that's because it's a 1024 image, so if I offset it 512 by 512, it should give me my seams in the middle. And as I've done such, you'll see that it has not done that. So I'm going to press Control Z. I'm going to press Control E to flatten the two layers together. I'm going to press Control C, Control V. Now I got a new layer. Press Control A again. New filter, other, offset, 512 by 512. Okay, so that's a little trick. Sometimes you got to have just the right dimensions to the layer you're working on. And you can see the seams are right in the middle now. You can use something like the clone stamp tool or the heal and brush tool to come in here to try to fix this all up. Might take a sample here, change the hardness somewhere around the middle there, change the size down. And I might just come in and just quickly and easily add in these little extra details. Just try to patch up the seam, basically. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. There's probably a website that does it automatically for you. You can turn any texture into a tileable, repeating tiling texture. That's going to be on you to find that. Normally what I use is bitmap to material, and it kind of auto generates a repeating tiling texture for me. So it doesn't always get it perfect or make it look real good, but you'll get the idea. It works fast, and that's the point. I don't gotta mess with too much stuff like this. And so trying to get these textures to look realistic and match up can be a little bit challenging. You would want to take your time doing the clone stamp method and going around and brushing things up and getting them back together. So if I offset it again, filter and just offset again, you'll see that this side looks fine. I offset it again. This side looks mostly fine. That's a little bit noticeable. And you can go back and just kind of fix things like that as you see fit. Maybe play with your sizes and how strong it is, the hardness. Just see what you can create, or maybe even change the flow a little bit. Just see if you can nudge things together to make them look more believable. Once that's done, though, you will have a tiling texture. In this case, this is my auto-generated one. I'm going to use that. Although I think this one would look much better if I had worked on it more. And then also, so make sure you save it as a PNG file or whatever you want to use, TGA, JPEG. So you got your tiling texture, save it where you're going to find it. Create some brushes or just brush tips. The way you do this for Blender is just make a white brush tip, make it on its own layer. I got the background here as black so you can see it, but just turn that off and then save that as a PNG file. And we're going to be able to use that inside of Blender to do a little bit of a painting with like the textures and everything. All right. Now we're going to go into Blender, and this is where the fun part starts. We got to set up a material for this that's going to behave the way we want it to, and predictably at that, so it's going to be a lot of fun. We have to go to the shading tab. We won't be able to see the effects of what we're doing unless we are in active shading, which is this viewport shading icon. But right now in the shading tab, it's automatically selected. We have right here the image texture. We have the shade, the material right here, and we also have the material output. First thing I want to do is I want to make sure roughness is set all the way up, specular is all the way down, metallics all the way down. Kind of set it up as I have it here. It's mostly default. And then what I'm going to do is grab this one and this one. So hold shift to select them both. Press shift D and I'm just going to drag them up. I'm going to actually press this one here, press G and slide it way out here. And we got to get this going so that it will look as we expect it to look. But we have to do a couple little shading tricks and UV mapping tricks. So we're going to add shader, mix shader. We're going to place that here on this line so it should connect. And then this one here we can actually attach the first one, and that other one will jump to the second one, which is great. This is the image texture for this one. This is the image texture for that one. I'm going to go ahead and change this one by opening. We're going to open the camouflage repeating pattern, and it'll do like this right here. You can see that the two images are mixing together. That's what that does. You can change the factor on it, and it'll do this number. All right, right now we want the factor at 0, and we want to fix this UV map. You see how it has the same themes? It's using the same UV map. So we're going to add in a input. We are going to do, see if I can remember this and get it right. Okay, it's not UV map. I know that was, I fell into that trap right there. It just seems so. We're going to use texture coordinate. Okay, it's generated. We're going to connect it to the vector. And instead of doing flat, we're going to use box. Okay. Now what it does is it auto generates a UV map for this specific texture. So if I blend them now, you can see that the other one is still using the UV map we created for the weapon. And now this one is auto generating one. And it's doing its thing. We can actually adjust this by adding vector mapping and just drop it on that line. It should connect them from vector to vector to vector. Okay. Now I want to make that pattern a little bit bigger, so I'm going to do scale 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Looks pretty good. It looks a little pinched in the back though. I don't really care for that. So on the x-axis, I'm going to make it like a 0.2. Maybe a 0.1, something more like that. And on a Z, I might do like a 0.4. So I can stretch this around and kind of make it look how I want it to. You can see I kind of like that pattern, the way it looks there. There is nothing really on the back sides here. Might be a little bit of a problem, but you can always bump around the location, kind of move that around if you want. It might not marry up with each other as well, so keeping it at 0 might be preferable. Let's change the scale and see if I can't just nudge in some colors on that. 0.15 maybe. 0.5. 0.5 is way too much. 2.25. Yeah, that's not too bad. Okay. Just one other little thing here. It says blend. You can actually bump that blend up, and what you'll see is that it starts blending together. It looks a little bit fuzzy though, and that's just what it's going to end up doing. It's going to kind of overlay things on top of one another. What I like to do is keep that blend as minimal as possible. At 0, it's a line. So if I blend it just at a tiny, tiny little bit, it's not as noticeable. Nobody's going to really complain about that, I don't think. Yeah, so we have that going. I think that's pretty good. I don't like that 0.5 on this one, so we're going to do 0.3 and 0.1, or 0.2 and 0.1, I think. I want it a little bit bigger. Let's do 0.2. See, it's pretty. Do 0.3, 0.3. 0.4. Just kind of nudge it around. Get something looking like I want it. All right. I'd say I like that a lot. Okay. We can work with that. All right. This is where the fun begins. We're not done. We have to press Shift A, create texture, image texture. Just drop it here. It doesn't have to be attached to nothing. We're going to create a new one. We're going to call this mask. Oops, sorry. We're going to call this one bake. 1024 by 1024 blank alpha. You don't necessarily need an alpha, but we want that right there. Okay. And what we're going to do before we continue on is we're going to get this bake out of the way, because a lot of times when you start baking, the texture that you bake out likes to go wherever it wants to go. So if we go to texture paint real quick, you can see we're on bake. It's black. Sometimes it might show up in AUG texture. It might show up on the multicam. It might show up in all kinds of different areas. We want it to show up in bake. So I know for a fact it's going to work right now. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Go back to the shading tab real quick. And so this image, just make sure it's selected. Okay. I'm going to go to the render tab here. We're going to change it from EV to cycles. Okay, we're going to go down to the bake tab. We're going to change it from combined to diffuse. And that's it. We're going to turn off direct and indirect. Turn them off. It's going to bake what we see right here for the most part. Okay. All right, so once the bake's done, you're going to actually have it pop up over here, but we can go to texture paint, take a look at it, make sure it's in bake. What you want to do is actually save this file. So we're going to save as, we're going to put it on desktop. We're just going to save bake.png, save it. Okay. And you might want to save your document at this time. So we're just going to save it, and we're not losing any information or data, so we should be all right. All right. So the bake is in there. Now, we're not done with shading yet. I know it looks complicated, but it's really not. What we need is another image texture. We need to create texture, image texture. Okay. Create new. We're going to call this one mask. 1024 by 1024. Okay. And we're going to plug the mask into the factor. Okay. This mask texture is all black right now. We go into shading. You can see it's doing this number. But if we go into texture paint, turn it to shading here. Now watch this. Let's do a fill. And we're going to fill it white. And you'll see that it erased everything. Okay. So in Blender, masks that are white are transparent and black is visible. In Photoshop, it's the other way around. So we're going to invert it later on when we take this image file and put it into Photoshop, and we'll edit the texture a little bit more in Photoshop. But that's how that works out. And this is why it gets kind of interesting and fun, because when you're in object mode, you can select things. So like the main body, I know I want to be textured. I want this hand grip to be textured. I'll probably do the trigger as well. But the rest of this doesn't really need camouflage on it. I mean, you could do the mag if you really wanted, but it doesn't necessarily need it. So I'm going to separate these. I'm going to separate that selection. And now what I'm going to do is go, well, we're in texture paint mode. I'm going to make sure I hit tab and go back to texture paint. All right. And I can use any number of brushes. So just click here, you got a brush. You can toggle between black and white. So if I press X, it toggles between black and white. You can see I can start coloring things the way I want it. And lo and behold, that camouflage pattern is right where we expect it to be. All right. You can also use the fill bucket tool and just hit the whole thing at one time. And you can see it does all the pieces that we're going to be working on, which is pretty useful. All right. So you can also use the fill bucket tool and get rid of certain things by hitting the islands, which I find useful as well. And there's not too much here that we need to get rid of. Okay. Now we're getting into the texture paint area. All kinds of different things you can do with texture paint. It's really, it's pretty crazy. There's all these different options. You got your brush here, but you got different mixes. You got radius, you got strength. There's other options up here. sometimes it helps to go into layout mode, switch over to the viewport shading, hit tab, go into texture paint, and you got just kind of a big window of that now. Go to texture paint mode. There we go. Here's where it gets really fun. A lot of pieces on this you probably didn't want to get rid of. So it helps to remember where your textures are. You can certainly just use white to make everything transparent. You can go around and kind of cut them out as such. And then just take your time doing this. You can change the strength using F to change brush size, or Shift F. You can also change your fall off, so you can use a custom or smoother or whatever the case may be. But also under texture mask, you can click new, and it'll make a new texture mask. If you actually look down here, this little texture panel, you can click and you can see it created texture. So you might want to just rename that as brush. You'll notice under texture mask now it's named brush as well. So you can always rename those. These two little areas kind of play off one another, little checkered, red checker pattern. So you can actually select different brushes you create. You can open. And so brush.png, which was that transparent white brush tip I made earlier. You'll see it comes in like so. You can use F, make it larger. You can use it as a stamp, but you'll notice that right now, if I press X, it's going to do this number, which is kind of meh. I don't really care for that. You need to change it around so that it's not just doing tiled, it's doing a view plane. And now it's going to do this number, which isn't much different, right? But what you can do is change it to random. It's still going to do that, huh? Okay, maybe it's not texture mask. Maybe it's under texture, and we'll do. Oh, why was it on both? Okay, textured view plane. So there's nothing loaded here. Brush is loaded here. All right, now it does that number. So you can use it like that as such. I like to turn on random. In the random angle, you can adjust to whatever you want. I'd say like 30 maybe is a pretty cool little setting. So you can do this number now. All right, and you can use your tablet or a pen for your computer or whatever you have. You can go in and start having fun just cutting things in and out. You'll notice that black and white kind of behave differently. White tends to feel a little softer, like it doesn't have as much strength, and then black feels stronger. Why it does that, I don't know. So you might find yourself playing with the strength quite a bit to kind of make things work with the way you expect them to. So you can see with that same strength going now, and as I'm using white, it's doing this number like so. So yeah, a lot of times I like to just kind of cut out the main features. And what will end up happening is I'll find my little nuts and bolts, and I'll make sure that I don't accidentally cover them up too much. And sometimes you might want to add things like stair back in there or whatever the case may be. We're just going to do a very quick rough kind of sketch out here of just roughing it up and details and all that. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You will get some issues using this when you run out of space on the side. You'll see it creates a straight line. Switch back and just kind of retouch it where you need to. Just pay attention to that. Try not to work on straight edges like that too much. Try to view them at an angle. And then you can go back through. You can do that number. It's really quite simple. It's quite easy. And that's all there is to it. Okay, so you can do that number. Go through it some more. Sometimes you might get in a little pinch where it doesn't want to work. Just change your angle a little bit, because it's going off the screen direction, like how you're viewing the model. Sometimes it works, sometimes it won't. And go through this model as fast as you want or as slow as you want. And the way this is going to work out is once it's all said and done, you can take it right into Photoshop and use this mask and get everything set up the way you need it set up. So for example, I want a little sharp edge around here. Let's just get it finished up real quick. You can use this as a stamp too. You can just click instead of using a pen. So you might want to do some numbers like this. This is going to look pretty rough. You can also turn your texture back off by just clicking X. In this situation, right here, let's change that strength around. Let's make it a little bit stronger. Because we do need this area. There's a little line where the receiver or the upper receiver, whatever you want to call it, is placed. And it comes down right here as well. So you might want to cut things like that out first. Big things. All right, so that is there. Yeah, refresh that as nice as you want to make it. So we're just going to cut all that real quick. Up here at the top, you can see it didn't want to go away. So sometimes you got to view it from a different angle. Sometimes you actually have to come paint in the texture paint tab. So do that if you have to. You can paint on that 2D image. It will work just fine. Go back to texture paint here. Just to give you an idea of this little area. You can see how we're doing it. If I go to texture paint, that's this area here. I change my brush size. I just go through it quickly, like so. That's now all fixed up. All right. So let's see, what do we got left? Like this bottom area. I would do this in 3D, this bottom area, because it's a little hard to see in the 2D view. If you need to hide anything, just go into edit mode, hide it. Oh, you know what? You'd have to separate it, I think. But yeah, so if you were to grab that, press L, and then yeah, because if you hide it, you go back into texture paint, it comes back. So you'd have to press P, separate selection. When you do that, it's actually going to mess up the mapping on it. It's going to do that number, but you can hide it now. So you can come in here and get that last little bit that's pretty hard to reach without painting that thing by accident. Just remember, we're painting on the mask, so it doesn't really matter what you do with that texture at this point, the camouflage texture. It's not going to make a huge difference. And we'll turn the strength down a little bit. I like to come back and kind of just lightly hit everything where it's scratched up. Maybe give it a little bit softer kind of edges. It needs some strength. It can't be nothing. Okay. And as you can see, you can kind of kill some of that repeating pattern doing this as well. Soften it up a little. All right, so go back into object mode, press Alt-H, bring it back. Now this should work just fine as well. Select both of them, press Control-J, join them back together, and it should bring that texture back together if you want to just have it together for whatever reason. We're not even going to be using this camouflage the way it's laid out right now. It was the one that we originally baked, okay? So keep that in mind. All right, And let's just finish this guy up. Put something right there, maybe. It's kind of a rough job. All right. I'm going to hide the reference and the suppressor. You can see how that starts to look. If you really put some time into it, it's going to look a lot better. Here's the trick. This is the mask. We're going to go ahead and save this. And we're going to save it on the desktop as mask, PNG. And go into Photoshop now. I'm going to go ahead and exit all of these. What I need to do is click open. And we are going to open the mask, the bake. Okay, get those two open. I got to go find the original texture. So I moved it. Oops. So we got the texture up in this folder. Okay. So we can actually take this one now, copy it, Control Shift V, paste it. That's so it places in, pastes into the place that it's supposed to. In case it doesn't want to, you can just copy Control Shift V as well. This is going to be our mask. We have to invert it. So this guy here, we're going to do create mask. We're going to hold Alt, and that will take us into the Alt and click on this little white square. That's going to take us into the edit mode. We can actually just paste it in here. It'll do like so. We can press Control I, and I'll invert it. So we actually didn't need to do this one here. We can delete that. And you can see now that this is all laid on top. It looks like so. I personally like it quite a bit, but I want to do a little bit more. So I'm going to actually turn this layer off. I'm going to turn Bake Modified. Well, we'll keep Bake Modified on. What I'm going to do is do Edit, Copy, Merged. Okay, I'm going to press Control V to paste. I'm going to press Alt, click this one. I'm going to recopy this mask. Go back to this one. And we're going to turn that back on. We're going to do another mask. Press Alt, click, paste. Oops, we need to copy this. Come here. Copy. Alt, click, paste. Okay, now you don't want to work. There we go. So now we have this guy. And this guy, I want to press Control Shift U. Hopefully it'll let me do it. Control Shift U. Should have turned it black and white. Okay, I want to brighten it up. Some brightness contrast. You can see it's doing this number. And I want to get it, I'm going to use Legacy. I'm going to brighten it up quite a bit. I'm going to use a lot of contrast too. But I don't want to kill it. I don't want to make it all pure white. Okay. Just something like that. And then when I turn this one on, you see how it's all flat camouflage? I can actually do a multiply. And it takes some of that shading and applies it to the camouflage. So that's a really cool little trick, because without that, it wouldn't look as good. You gotta remember, multiplied or not multiplied. All right, and I can also add a layer style to this and do a small drop shadow. So that's a huge drop shadow right there. We only need size of 1. And that's pretty much it. And we can just add a little bit of drop shadow to it. Make the opacity like 50%. That's just going to give the impression that this is painted on and there's a little shadow. There's a little ridge to the paint. It's nothing big. Because we did do the overlay like so. What we could do is we could collapse these probably. So we could probably take these two here, combine them together. So press Control E, see what happens. No, I don't like that. Let's try this. Let's apply. Let's do rasterize layer. And then we'll do a rasterize layer. Or apply mask. It'll let me. I have no idea why it's not letting me do that now. So let me do this on this one. Rasterize layer. And then this one it says no. I think I just got to apply the mask. So let's see. Press Control E. And it collapsed it to bake modified. I don't want it to do that. Always run into problems. Layer mask, apply. Okay. Set this to multiply now. Press Control E. What is it? Okay. It does that number. Let's add another mask to it after all that. No, I'm not going to mask mode. Good Lord. I didn't want to do that. Go back. This little guy. There was a little button for it. Where'd it go? I accidentally hit apply to the layer beneath it. There was a little button for that. I just don't remember where it was. Layer style. Oh, release clipping mask. That's what it is. That's a clipping mask. That's what it was. Okay, so we got this bag. I think the drop shadow disappeared. Might still be there, just barely. We'll just add another one. Okay. Let's see. We don't need to. Yeah, we'll leave that on as well. What's going on here? What's that? Oh, it's part of the mask. So you can modify this. You can keep working on it. But you just want to be a little bit more careful. This is why I created it as one layer with the mask. So I can come in here with the brush now. And I can use whatever I want. So like a pencil or soft brush or round brush. I just want to avoid edges, but for little details in the middle, perhaps, like right here. Maybe I want to have a little something going here. A couple scratches. I might do that in a little bit. You can do that number. Real quick, real easy. Screws, maybe you don't want them painted. Maybe you want to have a little damage near it. You can see that. It's like so. Can't really add anything like this area. That's kind of done. You can't really adjust that. But you can take away. So don't think you're going to add a bunch of camouflage to it. And of course you can use any of your other Photoshop tools. So if you want to add just some splatter and stuff, you can certainly do that. Just like I said, avoid the avoid the edges. You can do that if you wanted. That's a little too much. Yeah, so little deviations here or there aren't going to hurt a whole lot. You know, it might not be perfect, but when all this is done, you can save Photoshop file. I'm just going to save it as desktop. PNG texture. At this point, I would actually save this document. Certain things, I think, like mask, you might have to save. Tells you where it saved it, desktop mask PNG. You might want to just save them internally. I don't know if you can do that. You can pack things. So yeah, you could pack this and you can save it internally as well. So you'll always have it in case you delete the files. But nonetheless, you can just save it somewhere. All right. So now, combine this whole thing back together. You see when I combine it all back together, the UV map changes again, the box map. So that kind of happens. But let's go to layout. Let's take a look at it with the finished texture on it. So for this material, I'm not going to redo it. I'll call it texturing material. I'm going to create a new one though. And under this one, we're going to get rid of texturing. I'm going to call it finished. You can name it whatever you want. It's really up to you. Change the base color to image texture. Open. Here's the finished file. You can see it doesn't look good right now. It's because it's specular. And roughness needs to go. Specular goes down, roughness goes up. And that will fix that shading a little bit. Turn world opacity on if you want. It's going to give it a little bit more proper kind of background for the lighting. You can see here I've actually using the default, but you can always use other ones as well. So this is kind of nice with the multicam. It's kind of wooded background. You can kind of see how it looks once everything's finished up. I know it's a lengthy process, probably confusing as all get out because you know there's so many little steps, but just try to follow along with that, and you can certainly use Blender to do this kind of detail on your model. You can make it nicer than this too. So cut out little things here or there. Oh, one last thing. Let's see if this works. We're going to double click on the FX there. I should be able to blend this with underlying layers. So if I hold Alt and click on this little arrow, it should let me blend in that manner. But let's do the brightnesses. So where it's brighter, it might kill some of the texture uniformly. Yeah, so it does. So for example, we'll zoom in here real quick. Place that there. This little area, I haven't cut that out at all, but it's like a little texture to it, a little texture to that. If I press Alt, left click on underlying layer, you can see it kills the highlights a little bit. Or if I do them all together, it's pretty interesting. I kind of like that. Maybe I want to do that. Maybe I don't. Adds a little bit of extra to it. So yeah, pretty neat. Give it some credit there. I don't really care for that area though. So maybe I'll just do it soft. Maybe in that one little area. Go to the mask and we'll just kind of knock it out. Something like that. Save it again. Go back into Blender. Reload the image. And voila. There we go. So that's kind of how you can do that. It's it's the process. You know, take your time, figure out where everything needs to go. But it does work, and you don't have to buy Substance Painter. Substance Painter, I don't think is even really that good for this, to be honest. I think Blender works a little bit better. All right, that's it for this tutorial, and thanks for watching. All right, one last little detail, because I know somebody's already going to run into this problem, and that is if you are trying to do texture paint and it's drawing on your texture and not creating a mask, what you really want to do is go to press the N key, go to Tool. You'll see the tool panel here. You should have all your textures here that you can use. So I have the material changed right now, but if I was using the original texturing one, you can see I have mask, bake, texture, and the multicam. So just click mask, and that will get you back to the point where you can come in here and start making your changes as you need to, like so. See how that works out. All right, and that's the final word right there.